Chapter 1, Ordered Chaos. The alarm blared at exactly 5:30 a.m. Eleanor Washington's hand shot out from beneath the duvet, fingers finding the source of the noise with practiced precision. The sudden silence felt almost deafening as she blinked away sleep, the dim glow of her bedside lamp casting long shadows across her bedroom walls. 3 seconds of stillness. Then she swung her legs over the edge of the bed, bare feet meeting the cool hardwood floor. Day 27, she murmured to the empty room, voice still rough with sleep. Beside her nightstand, a small calendar hung on the wall, each passing day marked with a neat red X. 27 days since Hargrove and Associates had called her into the senior partner's office. 27 days since workforce optimization had transformed her from rising legal star to unemployment statistic. A small whine from the foot of the bed interrupted her thoughts.
I know. Your schedule is sacred.
The whine intensified, accompanied by the clicking of nails against wood, as a small, copper-colored dachshund paced in tight circles.
5 more minutes wouldn't kill you, Peanut.
The dog sat back on his haunches, brown eyes unblinking, accusatory.
Fine, you win, again.
Eleanor slipped into her running clothes, black leggings, a moisture-wicking top, and a light jacket to ward off the early spring chill. Her movements were methodical, efficient. The same outfit she'd worn for her morning runs since law school. The same routine that had carried her through 7 years at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Peanut watched her from the doorway, head tilted to one side.
What? Do you have fashion advice now, too?
The dog yawned, revealing a pink tongue and small, sharp teeth. 15 minutes later, Eleanor jogged along the river path, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. Peanut trotted beside her, his short legs working twice as hard to keep pace. Their familiar route took them past gleaming office towers where lights were just beginning to flicker on, through a small park where the same elderly man practiced Tai Chi each morning, and finally to the bridge overlook where Eleanor always paused to catch her breath. The city stretched before her, a sprawling network of glass and steel gradually coming to life as dawn painted the horizon in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in that maze of buildings was her next opportunity. It had to be. She checked her watch. 6:22 a.m., right on schedule.
Come on, time for your social hour.
Peanut's ears perked up, his tiny body practically vibrating with anticipation. If there was one silver lining to inheriting her mother's stubborn dachshund, it was the comforting rhythm he'd brought to her suddenly directionless days. The Madison Street Dog Park was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. Early morning was prime time for the neighborhood's professionals, dog owners who needed to exercise their pets before long days at the office. Eleanor unclipped Peanut's leash at the gate, watching as he immediately darted toward a group of larger dogs.
Peanut, heel.
The dachshund glanced back, something almost like contempt in his gaze, before continuing on his chosen path.
Every time,
she muttered, following after him.
We've been working on heel for 3 months.
Some dogs just have their own agenda.
Eleanor turned to find Maggie Chen standing beside her, a steaming travel mug in one hand and the leash of her placid golden retriever in the other. Maggie's scrub suggested she was heading to her shift at Metropolitan Hospital after their morning dog park ritual.
Yours doesn't.
Bailey is pathologically obedient. It's actually a little boring.
She took a sip from her mug, eyeing Eleanor over the rim.
So, any news?
Had a promising call with Williams and Reed yesterday.
And
I have a follow-up interview next Tuesday.
That's great.
It's a start. They mentioned they're considering several highly qualified candidates.
Well, I'm putting my money on you.
Eleanor smiled, grateful for the vote of confidence even as the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Across the park, Peanut had insinuated himself into a game of chase between a border collie and a labradoodle, his stubby legs carrying him in wild, unpredictable patterns.
I've got 3 more applications going out today. 1 for a litigation position at Mercer and Doyle, 1 for corporate counsel at TexCorp, and a fellowship at the Public Defender's Office.
A fellowship? That's quite a shift from corporate law.
Lower pay, but steady work. And my savings won't last forever.
The unspoken truth hung between them. Each passing day without income brought Eleanor closer to financial precarity. Her carefully constructed life, the downtown apartment, the retirement account that received automatic monthly contributions, the plan to make partner by 35, was slowly unraveling thread by thread.
Just don't forget to breathe occasionally.
Maggie squeezed her arm.
Bailey and I are rooting for you.
As if on cue, the golden retriever looked up at them with soulful eyes.
At least someone's life is going according to plan.
Eleanor said, scratching Bailey behind the ears.
Though God knows why my mother thought I needed a dog when she
stopped herself, the familiar ache of loss momentarily stealing her words. 6 months had passed since her mother's unexpected death, and sometimes the grief still ambushed her.
Hey, I need to run if I'm going to make my shift. Dinner this weekend? My treat.
You don't have to.
I want to. Besides, I need someone to complain to about Dr. Steinman's latest scheduling disaster.
Text me the details.
As Maggie departed with the ever-obedient Bailey, Eleanor scanned the park for Peanut. He had wandered to the far corner where a tall man with dark, rumpled hair was attempting to corral an energetic husky. The husky darted playfully away from its owner, racing in circles with Peanut now following in delighted pursuit. Eleanor sighed and made her way toward them, mentally calculating how much time she could afford to spend at the park before she needed to return home to start on job applications.
Peanut, come.
The dachshund ignored her completely, now engaged in what appeared to be a game of keep-away with the much larger husky. The husky had a tennis ball in its mouth, and Peanut was jumping up, trying to snatch it away.
Apollo, drop it. You're being rude.
The man's voice was low and warm, with a hint of amusement despite his clear exasperation. The husky, Apollo, tilted his head, considering the command before reluctantly dropping the ball. Peanut immediately pounced on it, attempting to fit the tennis ball into his comically small mouth.
I'm so sorry. He has selective hearing.
She bent down to retrieve the ball and her wayward dog.
No worries. Apollo's the same way. Brilliant when he wants to be, conveniently deaf when it suits him.
Eleanor looked up, finally taking in the tall stranger properly. He was dressed simply in well-worn jeans and a faded blue sweater with a hole beginning at one elbow. Wire-rimmed glasses sat slightly askew on a face that seemed more accustomed to smiling than frowning. His dark hair looked as though he'd run his fingers through it multiple times, giving him an absent-minded professor appearance despite being roughly her age.
At least yours comes when called. I've tried every training technique in the book.
Have you tried bribery? Works wonders with Apollo.
He pulled a treat from his pocket, and immediately both dogs were at attention.
Though it does create certain expectations.
He offered the treat to Apollo, who took it delicately, then glanced at Eleanor, silently asking permission before offering one to Peanut as well.
You're undermining what little authority I have, but go ahead.
He smiled, crouching down to offer the treat to Peanut, who accepted it with considerably less delicacy than Apollo had shown.
I'm Leo, by the way, and this escape artist is Apollo.
Eleanor. Friends call me Ellie. And this is Peanut.
New to the park? I don't think I've seen you here before.
We usually come later, but...
She hesitated, not wanting to launch into her employment situation with a stranger.
My schedule changed recently.
Well, Apollo and I are morning regulars. He needs to burn off energy before I open the shop.
Shop?
Bookstore. Nothing fancy, but Apollo's our unofficial mascot. The customers love him.
Something about his tone caught Eleanor's attention. A subtle warmth that suggested the bookstore was more than just a business to him. Before she could respond, her phone chimed. The reminder she'd set for herself. Read prep, 8 a.m.
I have to go. Nice meeting you both.
Likewise, maybe we'll see you tomorrow?
The question held no pressure, just a gentle curiosity.
Probably. Peanut's routine is sacred.
She clipped the leash back onto Peanut's collar, having to tug gently to get him away from his new friends. As they walked toward the park exit, she glanced back to see Leo watching them go, Apollo sitting patiently at his side. He raised a hand in farewell, and Eleanor returned the gesture before turning away. Back in her apartment, Eleanor moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. Peanut fed and watered. Shower. 7 minutes, no more. Hair dried and pulled back into a neat ponytail. No makeup. She wasn't going anywhere that required it today. The electric kettle hummed as she prepared her single cup of morning coffee. Her home office, once a spare bedroom, had been transformed into command central for her job search. A whiteboard mounted on one wall listed potential employers in 3 columns: applied, interview scheduled, and rejected. The last column was frustratingly long. Eleanor settled into her ergonomic chair, powering up her laptop as she sipped her coffee. The screen came to life, revealing the half-finished cover letter she'd been working on the night before. She frowned at it, dissatisfied with the wording. Too generic. Too desperate. Not desperate enough. Peanut wandered in, circling 3 times before settling under her desk with a contented sigh.
At least someone's relaxed around here.
She reached for her planner, flipping to the day's carefully structured schedule. 8 to 10, Williams and Reed interview prep. 10 to 12, draft applications for Mercer and Doyle and Tex Corp. 12 to 12:30, lunch. 12 to 2:30, Public Defender Fellowship application. 2:30 to 4, LinkedIn networking and follow-up emails. 4 to 5, professional development. Finish that article on recent changes to contract law. The day stretched before her, each hour accounted for. Control where she could find it. Eleanor took another sip of coffee and began to type, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard as she crafted yet another compelling narrative about why she would be an asset to Williams and Reed. The words came easily. She'd written variations of this letter dozens of times now, but each one felt increasingly hollow. You are a perfect fit for our corporate culture. Your experience aligns perfectly with our needs. I would welcome the opportunity to discuss how my skills can benefit your team. Professional platitudes that revealed nothing of the growing knot of fear in her stomach, the way she checked her bank account balance each morning with mounting concern, or how she'd started calculating exactly how many months she could maintain her current lifestyle before difficult decisions would need to be made. The morning passed in a blur of applications and research. Eleanor worked through lunch, absently eating a salad at her desk while reading about Williams and Reed's recent cases. By mid-afternoon, her eyes were burning from staring at the screen, and Peanut had begun his campaign for attention, periodically pressing his cold nose against her calf.
Not now, Peanut.
The dachshund whined, more insistent this time.
Fine, 5 minutes.
She pushed away from her desk, stretching arms that had grown stiff from typing. Peanut immediately trotted to the front door, looking back expectantly.
That's not what I meant by a break.
But she was already reaching for his leash, recognizing the signs that indicated a bathroom break was non-negotiable. They took the elevator down to the small patch of grass designated for the building's pet owners. The space was empty in the middle of the workday. Most of her neighbors were at their offices, living the life she was desperately trying to reclaim. As Peanut sniffed around the perimeter of the grass, Eleanor checked her phone. No new emails, no missed calls, no recruiters eager to connect her with the perfect opportunity. Her gaze drifted upward to the towering office buildings surrounding her apartment complex. Behind those gleaming windows, people were in meetings, drafting documents, building careers. moving forward while she felt stuck in an endless holding pattern.
Come on, Peanut, break's over.
Back in her apartment, she returned to her desk, determined to finish the day's tasks. But as she stared at her screen, the words began to blur together. The carefully constructed schedule that had seemed so manageable that morning now felt overwhelming. A notification appeared in the corner of her screen. A calendar reminder for tomorrow's dog park visit. The image of the tall man with the rumpled hair and friendly husky flashed in her mind. Leo. His relaxed demeanor had been so at odds with the frantic energy of the other morning dog park regulars, professionals squeezing in pet time before rushing off to important jobs. Eleanor pushed the thought away, refocusing on her screen. She had applications to complete, a career to salvage, a life to put back on track. She didn't have time for distractions, even pleasantly rumpled ones with kind eyes and treats for disobedient dachshunds. The sun was setting by the time she finished her last follow-up email. Her neck ached from hours of concentration, and her stomach was beginning to protest the meager lunch she'd allowed herself. In the kitchen, she surveyed the contents of her refrigerator, all carefully organized, portioned, and labeled. Tonight was supposed to be salmon with roasted vegetables, but the thought of cooking felt overwhelming. Eleanor closed the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, suddenly aware of the silence in her apartment. No music, no television, no voices. Just the occasional click of Peanut's nails against the hardwood floor as he wandered between rooms.
This is temporary,
she said to the empty kitchen.
just a setback.
She'd been repeating this mantra for 27 days, and each time it felt less convincing. Her phone chimed with an incoming text message, Maggie confirming their dinner plans for Saturday. Eleanor replied with a thumbs-up emoji, grateful for the friend who refused to let her isolate herself completely. After a dinner of reheated leftovers eaten at her meticulously organized desk, Eleanor prepared for bed with the same efficiency that characterized the rest of her day. Teeth brushed for exactly 2 minutes. Face washed and moisturized. Alarm set for 5:30 a.m. Planner updated with tomorrow's schedule, identical to today's except for the specific job applications to be completed. In bed, she scrolled through her phone one last time, checking email. Nothing new. LinkedIn, 3 connections she should follow up with. And her bank account. Don't think about it. Beside her, Peanut snored softly, having claimed his spot on the pillow next to hers despite her half-hearted attempts to establish boundaries.
At least one of us is adapting well,
she murmured, setting her phone on the nightstand. In the darkness of her bedroom, Eleanor stared at the ceiling, mentally reviewing the day's accomplishments and tomorrow's tasks. Everything was proceeding according to her revised plan. Applications submitted, interviews scheduled, network contacted, all the right steps toward rebuilding what she'd lost. So why did it feel like she was merely going through the motions? Why did each carefully scheduled day feel less like progress and more like treading water? The answer came unbidden in the quiet darkness, because this wasn't supposed to be her life at 28. She was supposed to be on track for partner, not updating her resume for the 40th time. She was supposed to be mentoring junior associates, not wondering if she should cancel her streaming subscriptions to save money. She was supposed to be building something meaningful, not just filling hours with busy work and anxiety. She turned onto her side, watching the rise and fall of Peanut's small body as he slept. He'd come into her life at the worst possible time, a final, complicated gift from her mother that Eleanor had accepted out of obligation rather than desire. Another responsibility when she was barely managing the ones she already had. And yet, in the past 6 months, the stubborn little dachshund had become a constant in her increasingly uncertain world. His demands for walks, food, and attention forced her out of her head and into the present moment. His complete disregard for her authority was frustrating, but somehow refreshing. A reminder that some things couldn't be scheduled, optimized, or controlled, no matter how much she might try. As sleep finally began to claim her, Eleanor's thoughts drifted to the dog park and to Leo with his unruly husky. There had been something calming about their brief interaction, a lack of pretense or performance that had felt almost novel in a city where everyone seemed to be selling some version of themselves. The alarm would sound at 5:30 a.m. The routine would begin again. Applications would be submitted, calls would be made, the job search would continue. But first, there would be the dog park. And maybe, just maybe, a few moments of unscheduled conversation with a man who seemed comfortable with the chaos his husky created, a quality that both confused and intrigued her in ways she wasn't quite ready to examine. Eleanor's breathing deepened as she drifted off to sleep, Peanut's warm body pressed against her side, the city lights casting soft patterns on her bedroom wall. Day 27 complete. Tomorrow would be day 28 of her unexpected detour. Another day of imposed order in a life that had suddenly, unwelcomingly, broken free of its carefully constructed rails. Chapter 2. The Book of Leo. The alarm's insistent beeping pierced the pre-dawn darkness at precisely 5:30 a.m. Eleanor's hand emerged from beneath the duvet, finding the source with practiced efficiency. Day 28. She allowed herself 3 deep breaths before swinging her legs over the edge of the bed, toes curling against the cool hardwood floor. The familiar weight shifted at the foot of her bed, accompanied by the soft jingle of tags as Peanut stretched, his long body extending to almost twice its normal length. He yawned, a high-pitched sound that ended in something like a squeak.
Good morning to you too,
she murmured, voice still rough with sleep. She padded to the bathroom, Peanut's nails clicking behind her on the hardwood. The dachshund sat in the doorway, watching with apparent judgment as she splashed cold water on her face. The mirror reflected the dark circles that had taken up permanent residence beneath her eyes, unwelcome tenants she couldn't seem to evict. Teeth brushed, hair pulled back, running clothes retrieved from their designated drawer, each action performed with the same mechanical precision as the day before and the day before that. The carefully maintained scaffolding of routine that kept her world from collapsing entirely. Outside, the city was still half asleep, streetlights casting pools of amber against the lingering darkness. Eleanor's breath clouded before her as she jogged along the riverside path, Peanut trotting dutifully at her side. The only sounds were her measured breathing, the rhythmic tap of her running shoes against concrete, and Peanut's occasional snuffling investigation of something interesting along their route. Eleanor checked her watch. 6:24 a.m. 2 minutes behind schedule. She adjusted her pace slightly to compensate. The Madison Street dog park came into view as the first true rays of daylight spilled over the horizon. Already, the familiar collection of early morning regulars had gathered. The investment banker with his immaculately groomed poodle, the elderly couple with matching terriers, and the group of young professionals who clustered near the water fountain, comparing notes on their busy lives while their dogs socialized with considerably less pretense. Eleanor unclipped Peanut's leash at the gate, watching as he immediately trotted toward the center of the park, nose raised as if following some invisible scent trail. She scanned the familiar faces, looking for... She caught herself. She wasn't looking for anyone in particular. Certainly not the rumpled bookstore owner with the unruly husky. That would be ridiculous after one brief conversation.
You're late today. I was about to leave without saying hi.
Maggie appeared beside her, travel mug in hand, her golden retriever sitting obediently at her feet.
26 minutes past the hour isn't late.
It is for you. Everything okay?
Just a lot on my mind. Second interview with Williams and Reed tomorrow.
That's great news!
We'll see. They've narrowed it down to 3 candidates.
And you'll be the best one. Obviously.
Maggie checked her watch.
I've got to run or Dr. Steinman will have my head. Coffee this weekend?
I thought we were doing dinner.
Both? I'm a doctor. I need the caffeine.
Eleanor smiled despite herself.
Text me.
As Maggie departed, Eleanor turned her attention back to Peanut, who had abandoned whatever scent trail he'd been following and was now, predictably, harassing a much larger dog, the familiar husky from yesterday, which meant
We meet again.
Leo stood a few feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of a well-worn canvas jacket. Today's sweater was gray, with a small hole at the cuff where his thumb occasionally disappeared through. His dark hair looked as though he'd attempted to tame it and given up halfway, resulting in a style that somehow managed to be both disheveled and deliberate.
Peanut seems determined to make friends with your dog.
Apollo has that effect. He's never met a stranger, just friends he hasn't properly greeted yet.
As if to demonstrate, Apollo dropped into a play bow before Peanut, tail wagging so vigorously his entire body shook with the force of it. The much smaller dachshund responded by circling the husky, barking in short, excited bursts.
They're speaking some secret canine language we'll never understand.
If they're plotting world domination, I'm pretty sure Peanut's the mastermind.
Leo laughed, a warm sound that seemed to start somewhere deep in his chest.
My money's on Apollo as the muscle. He once disassembled an entire bookshelf when I was in the back room for 10 minutes. Still not sure how he managed it without opposable thumbs.
Before Eleanor could respond, a woman approached them, her stride purposeful and direct. She was strikingly put together for 6:30 a.m., wearing tailored athleisure wear that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire running outfit. A small, fluffy white dog trotted beside her, wearing what appeared to be a matching outfit.
Leo, I was hoping I'd catch you this morning.
The woman's voice carried a practiced melody, her smile revealing perfectly aligned teeth. She barely glanced at Eleanor before focusing entirely on Leo, who shifted his weight slightly, his relaxed posture becoming just a touch more contained.
Morning, Vivian. How are you?
Better now.
She said, reaching out to touch his arm briefly.
You disappeared so quickly yesterday. I wanted to ask you about that book you mentioned, the one about urban architecture.
Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Classic critique of 1950s urban planning.
That's the one. I'd love to borrow your copy sometime.
Her emphasis on sometime carried unmistakable weight.
The store has several copies. You're welcome to purchase one next time you're in.
Eleanor bit back a smile at his polite deflection. The woman, Vivian, narrowed her eyes slightly, her smile never faltering.
Always the businessman.
She turned to Eleanor as if just noticing her presence.
I don't think we've met. I'm Vivian Clark.
Eleanor Washington.
Are you new to the neighborhood? I know practically everyone here.
There was a subtle emphasis on practically everyone that suggested Eleanor's exclusion from this knowledge was somehow a personal failing.
Not new. Just usually here later in the day.
Eleanor's Peanut and Apollo have become fast friends.
At the mention of the dogs, Vivian glanced down, her perfect nose wrinkling slightly at the sight of Peanut, who had returned to investigate the newcomer.
What an interesting little dog.
He's a dachshund. They were bred to hunt badgers.
How rustic.
As if on cue, Peanut's ears suddenly perked up, his entire body going rigid. His gaze locked onto a nearby decorative bush, tail stiffening to a perfect horizontal line. With a low, determined growl that seemed comically at odds with his small stature, he began to creep forward, belly nearly touching the ground.
I think we're about to see a demonstration.
Without warning, Peanut launched himself directly into the dense foliage, his entire body disappearing among the leaves. The bush shook violently as muffled, enthusiastic barking erupted from within. A moment later, a terrified field mouse burst from the opposite side, streaking across the park at top speed. Seconds after, Peanut emerged from the greenery, twigs and leaves adorning his fur like impromptu battle medals. his expression unmistakably triumphant as he trotted back to Eleanor's side.
He takes his ancestral responsibilities very seriously.
Leo cleared his throat, perhaps sensing the subtle tension that remained despite the interruption.
How's the column coming along, Vivian? Still exposing the city's hidden culinary gems?
Actually, I've been promoted. Lifestyle editor now. I'm curating an entire section dedicated to the city's cultural heartbeat.
She turned her attention fully back to Leo, effectively dismissing Eleanor.
Which reminds me, I'd love to feature your shop in our local treasures spread. The reclusive book lover who left corporate America to create a literary sanctuary. Readers eat that narrative up.
Something flickered across Leo's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or wariness.
I appreciate the offer, but I prefer to keep a low profile.
All press is good press, Leo.
That hasn't been my experience.
An awkward silence followed, broken only when Apollo bounded back to Leo's side, nudging his hand for attention. Leo absently scratched behind the husky's ears, his expression softening immediately at the contact.
Well, think about it. My readers would adore you.
She checked her watch, a delicate, gleaming thing that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent.
I should run. Breakfast meeting with the publisher.
She leaned in, pressing her cheek briefly against Leo's in a performative air kiss.
Stop by the paper sometime. My office has an excellent view of the river.
With a practiced smile in Eleanor's direction and a final lingering look at Leo, Vivian departed, her small dog trotting obediently beside her.
Friend of yours?
Customer. She comes into the shop occasionally.
She seems interested in more than books.
A faint flush colored Leo's cheeks as he ran a hand through his already disheveled hair.
Vivian has a particular view of the world. I don't quite fit into it.
He seemed about to say more when Apollo suddenly took off across the park, having spotted a squirrel near the fence line. Leo sighed, the sound carrying equal parts exasperation and fondness.
Duty calls. It was nice seeing you again, Eleanor.
Ellie. You can call me Ellie.
Something in his expression shifted, a subtle softening around the eyes.
Ellie, then.
He jogged after Apollo, calling the husky's name in a tone that suggested this was a well-rehearsed routine between them. Eleanor watched for a moment before turning to locate Peanut, who had wandered over to investigate the water fountain. As she walked home 20 minutes later, Peanut trotting contentedly beside her, Eleanor found her thoughts returning to the interaction with Leo and Vivian. There had been something revealing in the way he'd deflected the lifestyle editor's obvious interest, a gentleness to his rejection that spoke of practice rather than awkwardness, and that comment about keeping a low profile. She pushed the thought away. She had more important things to focus on than the mysterious backstory of a man she barely knew. Day 28 meant another round of applications, another day of scrutinizing her dwindling bank account, another carefully structured schedule designed to maximize her chances of re-entering the workforce before her savings evaporated completely. Leo Bennett stood in the center of Cornerstone Books, listening to the familiar symphony of his morning routine, the gentle hum of the ancient heating system coming to life, the creak of 100-year-old floorboards beneath his feet, the rhythmic clicking of Apollo's nails as the husky made his customary circuit of the store, nose twitching at the day's new scents.
All clear, buddy? No literary emergencies overnight?
Apollo paused his inspection to look back at Leo, head tilted in that particularly canine expression of attentiveness.
Yeah, I don't think bandits have much interest in first edition Steinbeck either.
After their early morning visit to the dog park, Leo had walked the 6 blocks to the converted brownstone that housed his bookstore. The 3-story building occupied a quiet corner in one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, its weathered brick facade standing in dignified contrast to the gleaming glass storefronts that had gradually claimed the surrounding blocks. Leo moved through the familiar space, running his fingers along the spines of books as he passed, straightening a volume here, adjusting a display there. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors and illuminating dancing dust motes in golden beams. He paused at the register, an antique brass behemoth that he'd refused to replace despite his accountant's repeated suggestions that something digital might be more efficient. Efficiency wasn't the point. The satisfying clunk of the cash drawer, the mechanical ballet of the ancient keys, these were part of the experience he'd created. A deliberate anachronism in a world increasingly stripped of texture and imperfection. The small office behind the register told a different story. Here, a sleek laptop sat open on a desk, otherwise covered with invoices, publisher catalogs, and handwritten notes. A modern espresso machine, his one concession to contemporary convenience, occupied the corner, already warming up for the day's first brew. Leo checked his watch, an understated Patek Philippe that had been his grandfather's, its value incongruous with his otherwise modest appearance. Still 40 minutes before opening time. He powered on his laptop, the screen illuminating with a spreadsheet of the previous month's sales figures. Despite the careful casualness he projected, Leo monitored these numbers with the precision of someone who had once managed portfolios worth billions and whose own personal wealth exceeded $100 million.
Up 2% from last month, Apollo. Maybe we can afford that fancy kibble you've been eyeing.
The husky had settled on his oversized bed in the corner, watching Leo with placid interest. A gentle knock on the front door interrupted Leo's review of the numbers. Through the glass, he could see the familiar figure of Marcus Chen, the older man who managed the flower shop next door. Leo crossed to unlock the door, the bell above it chiming softly.
Morning, bookman. Thought you might need this.
Marcus held out a small white paper bag that emanated the unmistakable scent of freshly baked pastries.
You're going to bankrupt me with kindness, Marcus.
Consider it payment for steering Mrs. Abernathy to my shop for her granddaughter's graduation arrangement. Biggest order this month.
Leo accepted the bag with a nod of thanks, the warmth seeping through the paper into his fingers.
How's business?
Steady. Not like the old days, but steady.
The older man glanced around the bookstore, his expression appreciative.
Not many of us independents left on this block. That developer's been sniffing around again.
Kincaid?
Same one. Offered Diane at the bakery generational wealth, if she'd sell.
Marcus's tone made it clear what he thought of this offer.
3 generations her family's been there. What's money against that?
Leo nodded, understanding too well the calculation that couldn't be captured in spreadsheets or profit margins.
Anyway, just wanted to drop that by. Apollo?
The older man bent slightly to address the husky, who had approached at the sound of a familiar voice.
Keep an eye on this one. Make sure he eats something besides coffee today.
With a final wave, Marcus departed, leaving Leo standing in the doorway of his shop, pastry bag in hand, watching as the neighborhood gradually came to life around him. Delivery men unloading boxes, early commuters clutching travel mugs, the urban tableau that repeated itself each morning, reliable as clockwork. Back inside, Leo moved to the espresso machine, the ritual of coffee making so ingrained he could perform it with his eyes closed. The rich aroma filled the small office as he measured beans, tamped grounds, monitored pressure. His hands, which had once executed trades worth millions with those same precise movements, now crafted a single perfect cup. The first sip was always the best. Leo closed his eyes, allowing himself this small moment of sensory focus. The sharp bitterness of the espresso, undercut with notes of chocolate and cherry. So different from the bland, corporate coffee he'd consumed by the gallon in his previous life. Back then, caffeine had been fuel, nothing more. A means to an end. Now it was one of many small pleasures he'd learned to appreciate. He unwrapped the pastry, an almond croissant, still slightly warm, and took a bite, savoring the buttery layers and delicate marzipan center. Marcus was right. He had a tendency to forget meals when absorbed in work. Another habit from his finance days that he was trying with limited success to break. Apollo whined softly, his blue eyes fixed on the pastry with transparent longing.
Nice try. You already had breakfast.
But he broke off a small piece of the less sweet end and offered it to the husky, who accepted it with exaggerated delicacy.
Don't tell Marcus. He already thinks I spoil you.
As Leo finished his breakfast, he reviewed the day's schedule in his mind. New shipment arriving at 10. Lunchtime book club at noon. They were discussing Kazuo Ishiguro this month. Then a quiet afternoon to catch up on ordering and perhaps make progress on cataloging the collection of maritime history books he'd acquired from an estate sale last week. A simple day. An ordinary day. The kind of day that would have seemed like a prison sentence to the Leo Bennett who had once thrived on adrenaline and competition. The Leo who had slept 4 hours a night and measured success in zeros. That version of himself felt increasingly distant, like a character in a book he'd once read but whose details were growing fuzzy with time. 5 years had passed since he'd walked away from his partnership at Kincaid & Bennett Investment Group, leaving behind the 8-figure salary and the expanding void where his soul had once resided. 5 years of rebuilding something smaller but infinitely more substantial, of learning to measure wealth in moments rather than millions. The sound of his phone buzzing pulled Leo from his thoughts. The screen displayed a familiar name, Richard Kincaid. Leo stared at it for a moment before declining the call. Whatever his former partner wanted, it could wait. It always did. At precisely 9 a.m., Leo unlocked the front door of Cornerstone Books, flipping the sign to open. Apollo took up his usual position near the entrance, unofficial greeter and the store's most popular attraction. The first customers would arrive soon, the regulars who came as much for the atmosphere as for the books themselves. Leo moved to the center of the store, surrounded by thousands of carefully curated volumes. The weight of other people's words, other people's worlds, pressed in from all sides. Not oppressive, but comforting. A reminder that even the most isolating experiences were, in their way, universal. His thoughts drifted briefly to the dog park and to Eleanor, Ellie, with her precisely scheduled morning and the stubborn dachshund that seemed determined to introduce chaos into her ordered world. There had been something compelling about the contrast between her clearly regimented approach to life and the small dog who refused to fall in line. As if the universe had decided she needed a reminder that not everything could be controlled, categorized, or contained. He'd recognized it immediately, that tension between who she presented herself to be and who circumstance was forcing her to become. He'd lived in that uncomfortable space himself once, still did in some ways. The bell above the door chimed, announcing the day's first customer. Leo pushed thoughts of Eleanor aside, turning to greet Mrs. Peterson, who came every Wednesday for her mystery novel and chat about her grandchildren. The rhythm of the day began, familiar and comforting in its predictability. If part of him kept returning to the image of a serious-faced woman with a ponytail and determined eyes, well, that was just one more thing to file away for later consideration. One more thread in the increasingly complex tapestry of his carefully reconstructed life. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Cornerstone Books, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. The lunch rush, such as it was for an independent bookstore, had subsided, leaving Leo alone with his inventory records and the pleasant background noise of Apollo's gentle snoring from his bed near the register. The bell above the door chimed, drawing Leo's attention from the computer screen. A familiar figure stood framed in the entrance, Richard Kincaid, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture radiating the easy confidence of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and immediately owning them.
Still hiding among the dead trees, I see.
Leo leaned back in his chair, an involuntary tension straightening his spine. Muscle memory from years of board meetings and high-stakes negotiations.
Richard, to what do I owe the pleasure?
Kincaid moved through the store with the deliberate pace of someone evaluating property rather than browsing books. His gaze swept over the shelves, the displays, the comfortable reading nooks Leo had carefully arranged throughout the space.
You know, when you left, I gave you 6 months before you came crawling back. Then a year. Now it's been, 5 years? Still scratching that idealistic itch?
Something like that.
Must be a hell of an itch.
Apollo had awakened at the visitor's entrance, his blue eyes tracking Kincaid with unusual intensity. The husky rose and padded over to Leo's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture that seemed both protective and reassuring.
Still have the mud, I see.
Still have opinions on things that don't concern you, I see.
Kincaid's laugh held genuine amusement, the kind that came from absolute security in one's position.
Always did like that about you, Bennett. No sycophantic bullshit, even when it would have served you.
He approached the counter, resting one manicured hand on its worn surface.
I've got a proposition for you.
I'm not interested.
You haven't heard it yet.
I don't need to. Whatever it is involves returning to a world I left for good reasons.
What if it involves saving this little
He gestured vaguely at the surroundings.
hobby of yours?
Leo stilled, his expression carefully neutral. Richard Kincaid didn't make social calls, and he certainly didn't cross town to visit former partners without purpose.
What are you talking about?
This block. Prime real estate. Criminally underutilized. The firm is diversifying. Direct real estate development, not just investment portfolios. My team has acquired most of the properties already. Mixed-use complex. Luxury condos above. High-end retail below. The whole works.
A cold weight settled in Leo's stomach.
Most of the properties?
The holdouts are few. The flower shop, the bakery,
His gaze locked with Leo's.
this place.
Marcus and Diane would never sell to you.
Everyone has a price, Leo. You demonstrated that principle rather effectively during our partnership.
I demonstrated a lot of things I wish I hadn't.
Kincaid sighed, the sound theatrical in its exaggeration.
This is happening with or without your cooperation. I'm offering you a courtesy because of our history. A chance to cash out at above market value.
Not interested.
Or
He continued as if Leo hadn't spoken.
come back to the firm. We're expanding the real estate division. Use that bleeding heart of yours to make sure we do this ethically or whatever lets you sleep at night.
Leo studied his former partner's face, searching for the trap.
Why would you offer me that?
Because despite your unconventional exit, you were the best investment strategist I've ever worked with. Because I'm tired of watching a financial genius waste away selling paperbacks to housewives.
That's not an answer.
Fine. Because the board remembers your work on the West Side investment package. Because clients still ask about you.
A flicker of something, perhaps genuine sentiment, crossed his face.
Because you were the son I never had. And I'm tired of this prodigal son routine.
Apollo whined softly, sensing the tension radiating from Leo.
I'm not coming back, Richard.
Then sell. Take the money. Open another shop somewhere else. God knows you can afford it with your portfolio.
It's not just about the shop.
It's never just about anything with you, is it?
Kincaid straightened his already immaculate jacket.
Think about it. Offers on the table for 2 weeks. After that, things get considerably less amicable.
He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the counter.
Your neighbors might listen to you. Make them understand that resisting is simply delaying the inevitable.
Is that a threat?
It's business, Leo. You used to understand the difference.
With a final meaningful look, Kincaid turned and left, the bell chiming with jarring cheerfulness in his wake. Leo remained motionless behind the counter, staring at the business card as if it might suddenly combust. Apollo nudged his hand, drawing Leo back to the present. He absently scratched behind the husky's ears, mind racing. Kincaid wouldn't have approached him directly unless the development plans were already well advanced, which meant Marcus, Diane, and the other small business owners who formed the backbone of this neighborhood were already in the crosshairs of one of the city's most powerful investment firms, now branching into development. The same firm where Leo had once been a star partner. The same man who had been like family to him, who had mentored him, partnered with him, shaped him into the kind of person who could look at a street full of small businesses and see only inefficient use of prime real estate. Leo had spent 5 years building a life as far removed from that world as possible. 5 years learning the names of his customers, establishing relationships with local schools for reading programs, creating a space that served as more than just a retail outlet. The store barely turned a profit most months, but profit had never been the point. He looked around at the shelves filled with carefully curated books, at the reading nooks where regulars spent hours lost in other worlds, at Apollo's bed positioned perfectly to receive both morning and afternoon sunlight, all of it under threat because of a world he thought he'd left behind. Leo could sell, of course. His personal finances were more than sufficient to start over elsewhere, despite the modest income the bookstore generated. But what about Marcus, whose flower shop had been in his family for generations? Or Diane, whose bakery supported not just her own family but the 4 employees who depended on their paychecks? The weight of the situation settled on his shoulders, familiar and unwelcome. The very thing he'd walked away from, responsibility for outcomes that affected dozens or hundreds of lives, had somehow found him again, this time wearing the face of his chosen sanctuary.
Well, Apollo,
He said, voice breaking the silence that had fallen over the store.
looks like our quiet life just got considerably more complicated.
The husky tilted his head, those eerily intelligent blue eyes fixed on Leo's face as if he understood every word. Outside, the afternoon sun continued its journey across the sky, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like minuscule stars. The world beyond the windows of Cornerstone Books carried on, unaware that for Leo Bennett, everything had just shifted on its axis. Again.